Welcome to Meet the Partner, Saving Lives by Understanding the Role of the Justice System. My name is Jeff Bornstein, and I'll be running this Dialogue for Health web forum with my colleague Merlene Tucker. We want to thank our partner for today's event, the National Overdose Prevention Network. Now it's time to meet the moderator of today's event, Dr. Carmen Rita Navarez. Dr. Navarez is the Public Health Institute's Senior Vice President of External Relations and Preventative Medicine, the Director of the Center for Health Leadership and Practice, and Director of Dialogue for Health for the Public Health Institute. She is also the Director of the California Opioid Prevention Network and the National Overdose Prevention Network. Carmen, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and good morning. Welcome to our audience today. This is a really interesting meeting that we're going to have in that we have an opportunity to really look a little bit for a moment at what the National Overdose Prevention Network is, and then start to dig down into what is the role of the justice system in overdose prevention and explore effective partnerships within that and partnering with that justice system. I think that one of the things we hear really often from folks working across the country is justice system is a very complicated organization. How do we understand who's really in charge here? How can we build some relationships? Who do we go to? Well, today we're going to try to answer some of those questions and try to see if we can get a little bit closer to what we need to know in order to reach the right person at the right time and get them involved in our efforts before we have problems that have gotten completely out of control. So next slide, please. So NOPN is the National Overdose Prevention Network, and what we're here to do is to really support you in what you are trying to do at your local community level. Back in 2018, our team here at Public Health Institute Center for Health Leadership and Practice launched a statewide forum for all coalitions, organizations, and individuals working to fight opioids in California. And through that work, we were able to build a successful learning network that's now serving 33 million Californians. Here's what we've learned. We've learned that in order to be successful working at the community level, trying to find opioids and overdose issues, that it takes very strong partnerships, that stopping overdose deaths requires collaboration with key partners from your community, and one of those key partners is justice, that it involves leveraging assets that you already have in your community. If you want better results from your efforts, bring together your local leaders, your local community members, all of your local community institutions in order to implement community-driven initiatives that are also aligned with evidence-based practices. It really matters to work across sectors by bringing everybody to the table. And finally, always adopt what works. You don't have to invent everything new. We really focus on the key evidence strategies for overdose prevention: prevent, manage, treat, and stop. You'll see this framework in much of what we talk about, much of what we present to you. So this network is something that we're making available nationally. We hope that you'll continue to participate in these conversations as we go forward, and bring in some partners and bring in thoughtful discussions, and hopefully can continue to amplify the work that you are already trying to do in your communities. So it is my pleasure now to introduce our speaker today, Cindy Cipriani, JD, who is an assistant U.S. attorney at the Office of the U.S. Attorney for Southern District of California. Keeping in mind that her position currently has her developing partnerships and programs that further the U.S. Department of Justice mission to prevent crime and enforce federal laws. She's the co-chair of San Diego's Multidisciplinary Opioid Coalition, which works across sectors to raise public awareness and end the vicious cycle of addiction and overdose deaths. And we'll get a chance to hear some of those stories today. She also leads the Juvenile Smuggling Prevention Team, and that was a collaboration that the Attorney General selected as 2019's Outstanding Contributions to Community Partnership for Public Safety. In addition, she's organized numerous events and efforts to address targeted violence and hate incidents, earning the Anti-Defamation League's Sherwood Prize for community engagement work combating hate. Cindy understands the legal system from a number of perspectives since she's worked as a staff to Ohio State Legislature and in the U.S. House of Representatives. She litigated for nearly a decade in the private sector, but for the last 23 years has worked in the office of the U.S. Attorney. She's held several senior management positions, including the Deputy Chief of the Civil Division, Executive Assistant to the U.S. Attorney, and First Assistant to the U.S. Attorney. So with that, I welcome Cindy to our conversation today. Good morning, Cindy.
Good morning, Carmen. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let's start with this. You're an assistant U.S. attorney for the Office of the U.S. Attorney. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the role that you play in this capacity in the intersection of the justice system and addiction.
So I am actually from Ohio. I know you have some Ohioans out there who are participating in this. Went to Ohio State, worked in the Ohio legislature following my undergrad degree, and then moved to Washington, where I got my law degree at Georgetown and worked on Capitol Hill, and then came out to California. So I was for a number of years in the civil division, but in about 2011, I was asked by the U.S. Attorney to join her executive office staff, and I became third in command of the U.S. Attorney's Office and then second in command. And around that time, President Obama was in office, and he really wanted to emphasize not just prosecuting and filing charges, but finding ways to prevent crime, finding ways to solve problems and collaborate with community partners. So toward that end, I did become involved because the opioid crisis was just starting to really reach into the national conversation, and people were starting to understand the roots of that problem and the nature and extent of that problem. I did reach out to local partners and realized there was an opioid coalition right here in San Diego. I didn't need to reinvent the wheel. I just needed to connect with those folks. And it was a far-ranging coalition that represented public health, the medical examiner's office, the district attorney, DEA, a number of local police officers and departments, including the sheriff and the local police, as well as prevention and treatment professionals. So it was a perfect vehicle to engage in conversation and collaboration. And I became very active in the coalition and ultimately started co-chairing the coalition about 5 years ago. So it's been, I think, a very cathartic work for me. I have someone with opioid addiction in my family. It's a very personal issue for me. And I think I have a very real understanding of what the problem is and how complex the problem is and how important partnerships are to solving the problem.
Thank you. That's good to hear that you're grounded in the theory of why partnerships are so critical. I'd like you now to kind of walk us through the justice system. It's complex. Most of us don't understand what the parts are and what the parts do, and myself included. So I'd very much like it if you'd talk about the parts, the relationships between those parts, and maybe some opportunities for potentials. And we'll dive into that a little bit more, but that's kind of the way I'd like you to set this up. And I just want to remind the audience that in the chat, there is a document that you can download or you can just click on, and it'll give you a little bit of an outline that'll help us to follow along with what Cindy was going to talk about. Okay, Cindy, your turn.
All right, this may be a bit of a long answer, but I'm going to give you a quick run through. So many people, for example, starting with the U.S. Attorney's Office, many people don't really understand what the U.S. Attorney does and what's different. What's the difference between the U.S. Attorney and the District Attorney? So the U.S. Attorney prosecutes federal crimes. There are 93 U.S. attorneys throughout the country. They are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And in their district, they are the chief law enforcement officer. So FBI, DEA, DHS, all of those law enforcement agencies, while they don't necessarily report up through the U.S. Attorney, the U.S. Attorney has the final say on when to prosecute, what charges to bring, what the media strategy or appropriate media responses on high profile cases. The U.S. Attorney is the convening voice for all the law enforcement executives and speaks for the administration from a law enforcement standpoint. and works closely with law enforcement partners on the local level, including the district attorney. So in a given case, it may be that the U.S. attorney and the district attorney decide who should prosecute. In some cases, they both prosecute. For example, in the case involving the synagogue shooting here in Poway, California, both the U.S. attorney and the district attorney are filing charges. And they work very closely together on issues like overdose prevention. We have, for example, a team that evaluates overdose deaths. And we try to go after the high-level dealers who are peddling the poisonous fentanyl on our streets. And we collaborate with the district attorney on all of those cases. So it's important when you do reach out to law enforcement to keep both the U.S. attorney prosecuting federal crimes and the district attorney prosecuting state crimes at the county level in mind. And the U.S. attorney is also connected to the broader DOJ justice system. And that comes into play in the context of overdose prevention and addiction in numerous ways. One agency that's very important to this effort is the Office of National Drug Control Policy. And you'll sometimes hear that office referred to as the White House Drug Czar. But basically that office is the office for the administration that coordinates all of the policies of the administration that affect overdose, that affect addiction, that affect drug use, drug policy, the criminal justice aspects, and the treatment aspects. And they also provide a great deal of funding for prevention as well as law enforcement. So it's very important to understand what that office is and how to connect to that office. And the U.S. attorney can be a vehicle that offers a connection to that office. Part of that office is the high intensity drug trafficking area designation. And we refer to that as HIDTA. And HIDTA provides a great deal of funding in local areas to prevention and to law enforcement. So for example, HIDTA is the entity that helps us put on every 2 years an opioid conference. It's a regional conference that brings in people from all throughout the Western region. And they help us basically provide voice to all different aspects and perspectives. They also have a funded prevention person in HIDTA that is a very important person to add to your coalition. If your area happens to be in a HIDTA area, you definitely want to contact the member of HIDTA who serves in a prevention capacity. They also work on really groundbreaking programs. For example, one of the programs we're working to implement here in San Diego, and I'll discuss this later when we talk about examples of important partnerships, is something called OD Maps. And OD Maps is a way to basically find out in real time when there's an overdose cluster that public health and that law enforcement and that prevention and treatment professionals need to know about and respond to. So HIDTA is incredibly important. And one of the areas that ONDCP is focused on that I think just takes on new significance in today's climate is putting out the administration's drug policies. And they recently did introduce a document and disseminate the Biden administration's drug control policies. And these policies are very far ranging. They don't just focus on law enforcement. They look at treatment, they look at prevention. And I think what we see in these policies is a huge focus on diversion whenever possible, and also harm reduction. They're greatly changed from the prior administration in a way that I think many public health professionals will appreciate. And I think they're sending a signal that this administration wants to collaborate, wants to be a part of partnerships that are about prevention and treatment and harm reduction. So it's important to keep in mind those policies and the personnel that are available to assist local coalitions and public health leaders when they're working to put those policies in place. All right, so next I'm going to talk a little bit about DOJ. So DOJ, many people don't appreciate, the U.S. Attorney's Office is under the U.S. Department of Justice. So of course that's headed by Attorney General Merrick Garland. Also part of DOJ, you have the Community-Oriented Policing Service, and you have FBI, DEA. There are a number of different segments that are very important in law enforcement and important to coalitions that are under DOJ. And you also have the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the Office of Justice Programs. And the reason they are important is that DOJ administers huge grants. And I'm sure some of you have been involved in attempting to get grants, it's important to know when you do apply for a DOJ grant, I mean, that's where the big bucks are, right? There are HHS grants that fund overdose prevention programs, but there are also DOJ grants that fund diversion programs, that fund efforts by local police departments and local communities to engage in partnerships to avoid drug overdoses. And for example, there's a huge opioid grant that was open in June, and there was a lot of money on the table. And I was getting emails from DC saying, can you please interest people in this grant? We're not getting that many applications. So it's a great opportunity to fund the work that you're doing. And it's important to know that when it comes to DOJ grants, the U.S. Attorney's Office can't write those grants, can't submit them, can't endorse you, but they can talk about the fact that they're involved in a coalition partnership with you. They can write a factual letter that you can submit with your grant. And those can be very important for DOJ when they're evaluating grant applications. So I encourage you to look at the money on the table, go to grants.gov, and get an idea of what the grant programs are that are out there. And also, don't be afraid to contact your local U.S. Attorney's Office to discuss the grants that you're interested in applying for. So that basically covers DOJ. I will say, usually in the U.S. Attorney's Office, if you're interested in partnering with the U.S. Attorney, most U.S. Attorney's offices, especially in large districts, we are in an extra large district that happens to be in a border area where fentanyl is basically coming in through that gateway. So we have a lot of resources here devoted to prevention. And when I say a lot, that means me and one staffer and another partial assistant U.S. attorney devoted to that. But usually you'll have at least part of someone in an office who's devoted to prevention. So do contact your U.S. Attorney's Office, find out who the prevention person is, find out who the law enforcement coordinator is. They are often interested in partnering with the community as well. And find out who the messaging person is, because it may be that you want to get the U.S. Attorney as a convening voice to speak out on an issue at an event you're having, and we'll bring more local attention to the issue, we'll bring media to the issue, and that can be a way to start partnering with U.S. Attorney's Office. So that's pretty much it for I think the federal folks through the Department of Justice. DOJ also has prevention personnel. DOJ has wonderful programs. DEA has wonderful programs. They actually have a virtual curriculum on the science of addiction in the brain that basically they're rolling out to schools. Here they're doing it in partnership with the San Diego County of Education. And it was fantastic during COVID because teachers were looking for that kind of content. And it was all set up to be really within line for critical thinking, for Common Core standards. It's a wonderful product that you may want to know about if you're engaged on the prevention end and in your schools to be partnering with DEA. Turning next to Drug Enforcement Agency, Homeland Security investigations, those folks are involved. They know what drugs are in your community. They're keeping track of how much fentanyl has been seized in your community, how much meth has been seized in your community. They can give you an idea of what the real problem is on the street. And here we have a collaborative effort with our community folks and our DEA and HSI partners to basically keep track of what's happening on the street. And so the medical examiner knows, the folks who are working in ER know, the folks who are in the 911 emergency services understand what the drugs are that are on the street. That partnership can be really important to understanding what you're looking at from a public health perspective, and it can help you with messaging and prevention as well. Homeland Security Investigations is not under DOJ. That is actually an entity that's under DHS. They are working very closely with DEA and with our office to prosecute especially fentanyl crimes and major meth surges that are coming across the border. Those drugs come through California, but they end up in your communities as well. And so it's important to know that those resources are out there and there are voices out there that you can use to amplify what you're seeing in your community and to help message. So for example, last week, we had a training program for media, and that was a partnership through the district attorney, our office, DEA, and HSI. Public health participated in that as well. And we basically trained reporters on the nature and extent of the fentanyl problem, what fentanyl is, what synthetic fentanyl analogs are, the kinds of overdose numbers we're seeing, how they're skyrocketing. And it was really an important effort because many reporters come to these stories without having the full background. And so this was designed to give them the scientific background, the law enforcement context, the public health context. And it's just one example of how a successful partnership can work together with the justice system to message and to basically alert the community about what the problem is and to provide more effective stories and more effective hopefully messages that are going out to the community about what they need to be avoiding, particularly when you have counterfeit pills that many people are taking without recognizing that fentanyl is laced within those pills. Okay, so turning to the district attorney's office and what you're seeing at the county level. As I said, the district attorney's office is involved in prosecuting overdose deaths here in San Diego, but they also are doing that in a number of other communities throughout the country. If your district attorney's office is not pursuing overdose deaths, or your U.S. attorney's office is not pursuing those deaths, and that's something you would like to pursue, ask for a meeting. Get that point across. I think people are really concerned about not going after co-users. You don't want to be prosecuting for an overdose death with potential murder or distribution resulting in death charges, somebody who is a co-user who happened to give a pill to or give a drug to somebody who's a co-user, somebody who's has a substance use disorder. What we're looking at in these cases is to go after the major dealers, to follow the drugs, for example, the counterfeit pills that are killing people, to get to the source of that supply and disrupt that supply, and also work our way up to the major dealer who's supplying multiple dealers with poisonous counterfeit pills laced with fentanyl. So those actual charges can be an important way to get the deterrence message across and to disrupt that supply. It's important to craft those programs carefully. And we have a very thoughtful district attorney, Summer Stephan, here in San Diego, who is really crafting a very careful, deliberate, and considered approach. And we work in partnership with her. So what else does the district attorney's office do? Well, that is really the front lines for your diversion program. We have excellent diversion programs here, a veterans diversion program, a mental health diversion program, numerous drug courts here in San Diego. I think those are very common in courts across the country, but it's something to basically consider a partnership with your district attorney's office. If you have concerns about the way the district's diversion program is going, it's important to potentially, have a voice into that, to be inviting the district attorney into your coalition and into your partnership so you can have conversations about that. I mean, all of that is taking place here in San Diego, and those are important conversations to have. The district attorney is also an incredibly important messaging voice. I think she is often the main voice because she handles many, many, many more cases, both misdemeanors and felonies, than the U.S. Attorney's office does. The U.S. Attorney is looking at big, high-impact cases where there's either a federal charge, something that's crossing state lines, or something that involves the U.S. border, which obviously my office in San Diego is handling a lot of. Most cases are going to go to the state. They're going to involve state charges and go to the district attorney who's going to be prosecuting those. So it is an important voice to have at the table. It's an important voice for convening and messaging as well. And it's where a lot of the work gets done. Now, most district attorneys' offices, they will have a number of different people that you can contact. Many of them do have prevention and outreach professionals. Our district attorney's office has a number of community prosecutors. These are people who are responsible for developing community partnerships. They don't prosecute cases anymore. She also has a prevention person that does nothing but prevention and work on partnerships and facilitating those partnerships. In addition, the chief of her narcotics unit has been incredibly involved, has been involved in getting the overdose prosecutions off the ground, incredibly involved in our coalition as a voice and a presence at our coalition, involved in prevention programs for youth, is planning a youth summit on opioids in particular this fall. And I think that's an important voice, to be having at the table and to be connecting with. The district attorney's office is also a conduit really to all of law enforcement in your county. So basically, she is working with all of your local police agencies and also the sheriff in your county for areas that are unincorporated. And the way that breaks down, many people don't have a full understanding of when do I go to the sheriff, when would I go to the local police agency. If you have areas of your particular area that are unincorporated, where they don't have a city government, those areas will be controlled for law enforcement purposes by the sheriff. The sheriff is a very, very important partner to have at the table. In our district, the sheriff in San Diego was the very first law enforcement entity in California to be carrying naloxone, trained every single one of its deputies to carry naloxone and to use naloxone before that was widespread. They also are involved in take back days, which DEA coordinates, and they are doing take back all year long. They have a bin at the sheriff's station and at their stations throughout the county where they are taking back drugs that you do not want kept in your medicine cabinet. I think all of us have seen that one way to make our homes safer, to make our communities safer, is to minimize access to drugs. And the sheriff in our district is playing a very important role in that effort. Many sheriff's departments do have prevention professionals, or at least one person, a few people who are deputies who are engaged in prevention and who will be very useful in your efforts. So definitely reach out to the sheriffs, reach out to your local police agencies as well. Many of them are engaged in prevention or have a local captain that you can rely on if you're having an event and that you need a police presence at that event or messaging at that event. And I'm sure they're all very concerned about and share your concerns about overdose prevention, about the drugs they're seeing on the street, about the addiction problem. I will say across law enforcement, there has been a much greater effort to increase understanding about the nature of addiction, to reduce the stigma associated with addiction. So I think it's important for both sides to have an open mind about what the other side has to say. And I think that they are, very open-minded about collaborating with prevention treatment professionals, discussing new ways to handle things that won't increase the population of substance users in prison, but will find another way towards prevention and for treatment. Across the country, there are law enforcement-led diversion programs. I know they have a great program in New England where they're actually, rather than law enforcement working to get people who are overdosing and who are experiencing, severe drug dependence problems into treatment, they are working with peer coordinators, peer navigators, and counselors, and assigning every single person to a peer counselor, and that person is getting the person into treatment, because law enforcement may be the first one to identify the problem, may not be the best way to get the person into treatment because of sometimes distrust. So there are all kinds of creative law enforcement approaches that can be brought to bear on this problem. And I will say that, from what I've seen, law enforcement, those folks on the street, they care about community policing, they care about the people and the public safety in their communities, and they're very open-minded to partnering with you. So don't hesitate to reach out and talk about what they can do to help. Oftentimes money is an issue, and sometimes there are grants at the state level or at the county level that can help at least seed a program and get it off the ground. And again, you've got those DOJ grants that are out there as well. If there are experienced prevention people and grant writers that can partner with law enforcement, I know many times law enforcement definitely has the interest in getting the money. Show me the money, right? But they don't have the resources to write the grant. So it's another great opportunity for a partnership that can involve prevention and treatment and county professionals potentially writing a grant opportunity, or an NGO writing a grant opportunity in partnership with law enforcement. Some of these grants are only open to public agencies, but that doesn't mean they can't partnership with NGOs and treatment professionals and getting that grant off the ground. So other ways that we've seen police take action are the overdose death investigations, prevention outreach, and naloxone and harm reduction. They can be very, very important to those efforts. I think it's much more common now to have naloxone administered by law enforcement all throughout the country. And they can also be instrumental in letting people know about naloxone. So we now have agents, federal agents, who show up at a death scene to investigate, and they're going to try to find out who else has taken the same pills that this person overdosed on. And they're going to try to reach out to those people and get them information on treatment and get them naloxone, because the best indication of a future overdose is a past overdose. And if you know somebody is taking fentanyl pills or drugs laced with fentanyl, you know they're at risk of overdose, and you want to try to get them naloxone. Law enforcement can be an important part of that effort, not just saving the person who has overdosed, but reaching out to others. So now I'm going to turn to the very local level and talk about what the city attorney does. In some communities where you've seen decriminalization occur, and that's happened here in San Diego with Proposition 47 passing, we basically saw a number of possession crimes, which would have been felonies, turned into misdemeanors. Now, many in the community cheer that, and for good reason, right? We want to see people go into treatment. We don't want to see people with substance use disorder who are struggling basically be faced with prison terms for a felony, and that's going to disrupt their life. It's going to disrupt their job. It's going to put them on a worse path than they were before. And we all recognize that. The frustration is for law enforcement. We see people who ordinarily would have been put into treatment by the court, who are now not facing a felony and therefore not interested in treatment at all. And what we saw here in San Diego was a number of people who were cycling in and out of misdemeanor, homelessness, misdemeanor. They kept going through charge after charge after charge the city attorney was bringing, because the city attorney is the one that is bringing the misdemeanor charges for the most part. And they weren't getting better. It was overwhelming the system. It wasn't healthy for law enforcement, the system, or for the person. It was not efficient, and it wasn't producing a positive result. And so our city attorney adopted a number of different diversion programs that were designed, particularly with meth, which is the biggest problem we're seeing out on our streets right now. When that was decriminalized, small amounts of meth were decriminalized. Basically, the city attorney was seeing this repetitive cycling problem and adopted a number of programs that now have been in place long enough to see they're working. People are getting into treatment, and the treatment programs are designed to get them customized counseling, customized access to housing, to basically take them off the street and get them the resources they need. And in many ways, what we hear is first housing for our homeless population. Get them into housing, get them into treatment, get them the customized resources and case management, and you will see a positive change. So the city attorney is very important to that effort. And if you are seeing decriminalization and a number of people cycling through, it's important, I think, to bring the city attorney into the conversation. I'm sure they're having those conversations as well with both law enforcement and with the court, and for the community and for treatment professionals to be part of that conversation, I think, is important. So that really takes care, I think, of most of the just the Justice Department overview. You've got the city, the county, the feds, you've got law enforcement, and also prevention professionals pretty much within those agencies who are, I think, ready to partner, open to partnering. Sometimes they lack resources, but the heart is in the right place, and they're open to having conversations and to working with you and finding better ways to do things and ways to accomplish more through partnerships.
Well, thank you very much for that, Cindy. That is just such a good example of both being able to lay out what is a very complex system with many, many layers, and and something that really provides a lot of confusion for people that are trying to figure out how to navigate, how to find the right partner, how to touch the right person in the right agency who's at the right time who can help them with their local issue. So I'm going to just start by asking you a question about how would you advise people to go about finding the right branch of government, the right agency, the right office to help them with their local problem? What do you do to get started navigating that?
You know, I think it can really differ depending on what the issue is. But let's say the issue is opioids in your community. I probably would reach out to the U.S. Attorney's Office and to the District Attorney's Office to start. And depending on what you're trying to accomplish, if you're trying to accomplish, for example, a diversion program, those are the folks who are going to be placing people into diversion. The decision about whether to have a diversion program, how to basically form the diversion program, what the protocol is going to be for the diversion program, that's going to be up to the prosecuting entity for the most part. They are going to be working with, many times, the court, with defense counsel, with the various, we have here in the federal system, pretrial services that runs our diversion program. So they're going to be working with multiple partners, but we do have conversations about how to structure those programs. When it comes to getting a message across, say you want to have an event and you really want to be getting some press for that event, it's going to make a difference if you have the DA or the U.S. Attorney speaking at that event, or the police chief speaking at that event. In that case, you would want to be contacting the public information officer, the public affairs director, and basically getting that person to the event. And sometimes the event and that contact is what starts the partnership going. I believe that one of the first things I did with Laura Duffy was to, on Opioid Awareness Day, create a program where we went into schools and the media came into schools with us, and that brought attention to people that was an issue the U.S. Attorney cared about, and people started reaching out to us. So we can have, I think, a cumulative cascading effect to have the U.S. Attorney or the District Attorney involved in your events. It creates that initial connection, and it's basically an opportunity for them to get their message out there. It's an opportunity for them to become more widely known by their community, and it's an opportunity for you to increase the audience that's going to hear your event. So looking at the prevention professional and the public affairs or public information officer is always a great way to connect. Also, in many U.S. Attorney's offices, all U.S. Attorney's offices actually now have an opioid coordinator. So if you're looking for someone to provide a speech, maybe not the U.S. Attorney, but someone from the office to provide a speech on opioids, or to get you information on what the nature and extent of the problem is in your district, or to get to coordinate with you with broader DOJ agencies, the opioid coordinator in every U.S. Attorney's office would be able to assist with that.
Well, those are good starts, and hopefully it helps us to think a little bit about just what is that first step, and how do you maybe make a more informative and less how would I say this, an engagement happen that is less around bringing the cops down on a crime, but more about getting the resources and understanding about what the resources are that are out there and getting that relationship going. It's a different tactic. It's really a different path that you would follow. So talk a little bit. First of all, let me thank the audience for coming up with some really good questions, and I'm integrating them into this into the list that I've already got. And also just want to do a little shout out to let everybody know we've got a lot of different folks from different parts of the country involved in this conversation. So we're trying to keep it as high as we can in the discussion, while at the same time not being so high that it doesn't make any sense at the local level. So talk a little bit about the kinds of data that are available to the public that the Justice Department collects. How would you go about finding out what that data is, and how do you make it useful to you on the community level?
I have to say the Justice Department isn't always great about real-time data and releasing it. So, for example, when it comes to our charges, we generally will release information that shows how much, for example, fentanyl charges have increased from year to year. We don't always talk about the number of those charges or the number of defendants prosecuted. For some reason, that is viewed as more kind of law enforcement sensitive. But I will say that the information that I think is so important for the community to get, that you can get from DOJ, is seizure information. So you want to know to really evaluate, what is the problem in your community? You know, is it meth? Is it opioids? What's on the street? That information can be usually obtained from DEA. I mean, you may have to, search around a bit to find the best way to get that information. I would start with the public information officer, because they will deal with requests oftentimes from the public or the prevention professional, but they can tell you, for example, what's been seized in your state, how much fentanyl has been seized in your state, how does that compare to the year before, how much meth has been seized, and how does that compare to the year before. We also look at what's been seized over the border, because obviously we're a gateway for a lot of the drugs coming across from Mexico. And that is a huge indicator for us. When we look at the fentanyl that's been seized on the border, if you were going to map the fentanyl overdoses against the increase in fentanyl seizures, those two maps would correlate. What's coming across the border, when that increases, we are so much better. We're really good at disrupting the supply and getting a lot of the drugs when they cross the border. We don't get every load. And so for the loads that get through, the seizures are some indication of what the cartels are trying to get across. And the loads that do get through tend to coordinate with the overdose levels. So those are stats you can get from Justice. If you want to know what the deaths are in your community, those are usually a public safety function, not necessarily law enforcement, but can be obtained from the county. So the DA's office would be a way to get that from that. You're not just going to be John Doe calling the medical examiner yourself, right? But if you call the prevention person at the DA's office, they might be able to collaborate with you to get those numbers out. I think all of California and really across the country, people are trying to do a better job at getting out real data, real information in real time that the community can act on. It is an ongoing work in progress, though, to get that information. So depending on the information that you're looking for, I would say the DA's office is a good place to start. The medical examiner's office, the U.S. Attorney's office, at least hopefully can point you in the right direction.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference to communities to have real numbers to help educate other folks in their communities about what's going on and where they need to look and what the prevention strategies need to be for their community. So let me ask you a little bit about, could you walk us through the case of illicit fentanyl? We know it's got the potential to kill, and it takes many unsuspecting lives. But in the situation where you have counterfeit pills, talk a little bit about what the differing roles are of the local folks, the county folks, the feds. What role does each part of government have to play in that?
So the feds at the border are trying to find those pills, right? And those pills can be secreted in a number of ways. I mean, they're teeny, tiny pills. And so, there are a number of pedestrian crossers who have different, bags of pills stacked in different parts of their bodies. And we ultimately prosecuted a woman. Her name she was affectionately called the drug llama, because she had so many incidents. By the time we caught her, she had come across numerous times, and we estimated she probably got 450,000 counterfeit pills across. So at the border professionals at the Customs and Border Protection are working with Homeland Security investigations to basically prosecute those cases. We take those cases for prosecution, and then they're going to work their way up along with DEA and try to figure out who our contact is with Mexico, try to bring charges against the individual in Mexico and extradite those folks. Now, more at the community level, what you have are people responding to scenes where fentanyl has been found, where overdoses have occurred, where we're getting tips maybe that there's fentanyl trafficking occurring. And that can be both counterfeit pills and bulk fentanyl. And it can be incredibly serious. And we've seen toddlers die from a counterfeit pill falls out of somebody's pocket, and the toddler sleeping in bed with dad takes the pill. and tragically, the toddler dies. So you have people showing up at the scene. We have a team 10 here. We call it team 10 because there are 9, DEA is hosting this team. There are 9 other teams. And on team 10, you have Homeland Security Investigations, you have DEA, you have local police. And they're all responding at the scene, and they basically are working with people from the emergency services profession, and oftentimes folks in emergency rooms, trying to work back who overdosed, who else had these drugs, who can we make sure we get naloxone to, who do we need to go to figure out who the ultimate dealer is. And so those are complex investigations. And when somebody overdoses, it's not unusual. They try to get the phone of the person that overdoses. They try to work back through and see if they can arrange a buy with the same person who sold to the person who overdosed, so that they can ultimately get to the source of the overdose, the counterfeit pills that people are overdosing on. So it's not an easy problem to solve because right now it is so ubiquitous. But law enforcement has also worked on messaging. For example, the district attorney's office has a huge social media campaign directed around the fentanyl counterfeit pills. We also worked with our county public health department to get billboards all over San Diego County, basically warning people about the counterfeit pills. You really need a multi-pronged approach, and we all work together on all of those campaigns.
So a couple of good questions from our audience. The criminal justice landscape is heavy on legal and law enforcement. So where is corrections like jail, prison, parole, probation, et cetera, on this? Can you talk a little bit about that? And also maybe talk a little bit about reentry.
Those are great questions. So here in California, we actually have a MAT project. We are working to get MAT into all of our custodial environments, which I think is just so incredibly important. I actually presented on this at our opioid summit a couple of years ago and realized that many of our custodial settings weren't set up to do MAT. And they may do it if you asked about it, or if you had a lawyer that was pushing for it, but they weren't automatically set up to do it. And that is changing. And all the cases have come down and basically said, if you are on medically assisted treatment, you have a right to get that when you go into a custodial setting. It's getting much better. It's improving. If that is an issue, that's something you definitely want to reach out to folks. The U.S. attorney or the district attorney can help you work through that because they have relationships with the folks at their custodial settings, and they can maybe be an entry point to you if you don't know who to contact. But I mean, it is important, right, under the 8th Amendment that people have. I would say that on the probation end, at least here in California, people are getting much better about understanding the stigma associated, to stay away from stigma, to find ways to ensure that people have the resources they need. The biggest time for relapse is when you're getting out of rehab or you're getting out of a custodial sentence. And basically that is when we see a lot of overdoses occur. So we realize people need to get that medically assisted treatment before they get back out. And so our probation department here is very actively engaged on that issue, both on the federal side and the county and the state side. And I think that that's become recognized as a best practice in that profession. It may not be catching on and integrated everywhere yet, but that is the direction where we are heading.
So, so that was very helpful. I think that's a pretty complex story. We probably could do a whole session just on that, but at least we've had a chance to touch on it and open that box up a little bit. Talk a little bit about the kinds of opportunities that might be out there for somebody who was convicted of a federal felony drug-related crime, but who's completed treatment, is off parole, and has been in recovery for a number of years, to have their felony reduced to a misdemeanor or ideally eliminated altogether. What's the status of that kind of process?
I will say I've never seen that happen on the federal side. I mean, I'm not going to predict whether it may in the future. I think for example, there are people, definitely different kinds of diversion programs on the front end. We call front end diversion programs. Here in San Diego, we had a really, really progressive program under U.S. Attorney Duffy that was basically banished during the Trump administration. So it remains to be seen whether our new U.S. attorney who has not been nominated yet will bring it back. But for example, in that program, we were looking at people who were, say, in the 18 to 25 age range, a lot of equitable consideration, carried drugs across the border, and in some cases, hard narcotics across the border, but did suffer from substance use or had other really, really powerful equitable circumstances. And we basically carefully screened every single case, put them into a diversion program that would enable them to avoid the felony. Once the felony is on the record in a federal case, I think the only way to get that expunged is through a commutation or pardon process. Those are pretty rare. And I'm sure you've heard about those. And it's not unusual at the end of a presidency, for example, for a number of commutations or pardons to be awarded, but it's pretty unusual. So it's better if you can come up with a program where you're avoiding the felony. Those are not done often. I think our program may be the only one in the country. Los Angeles also had a program, but it allowed you to avoid jail time, but did not allow you to avoid the felony conviction. In some cases, it might have been reduced to a misdemeanor, but you were not avoiding a conviction. Those programs are unusual on the federal side, but I think debate is, there is new debate about the importance of considering these diversion programs. And I predict, not based on a lot right now, but my personal sense of where things are going and looking at the administration's drug control policies, that this will become an ongoing conversation.
Well, that's helpful to hear. Let's go back for a moment to the issue of getting treatment into the jail environment. I remember hearing 2 years ago at the meeting that your office held on opioids with Justice Department and other partners, that the American Disabilities Act actually has sort of changed the environment in which anybody operates, that if you have a condition that is defined as a disability, that you are required, that the agency that's got you, that's holding you, is required to meet your needs. So could you talk about that a little bit as a strategy? This is our last question, but as a little bit as a strategy of how to get a local jail to comply with ADA.
What I saw in the cases that I reviewed, you need an advocate to bring that case for you. If you are experiencing difficulty getting the treatment that you're entitled to, you need to go to the ACLU is basically what I would say. I mean, the ACLU has filed almost all of those cases. And when the ACLU takes your case, they're taking it free of charge. They're very focused on issues involving constitutional rights. And, as I mentioned, there were Eighth Amendment issues raised in those cases as well. And so I would be contacting in that position the ACLU and asking them to file a case. And, it's great to engage in conversation and ongoing policy development and change, but sometimes you don't have the luxury of time. And really the one way to get that entity's attention is going to be to file a case.
Oh, that's very, very helpful. I really want to thank you, Cindy, on behalf of the National Overdose Prevention Network and everybody who is participating on this call. The questions were good, the issues are grave, and we have a long way to go. So thank you so much for being a part of this, and we look forward to seeing you in some future presentations. And let me just ask to go to the next slide to just remind our audience that the part 3 of Saving Lives with Trauma-Informed Practice is coming up. That's going to be Wednesday, August the 4th. So if you've listened to parts 1 and 2, please, please join us for part 3. If you haven't listened to parts 1 and 2, you can find them on the website that you originally came to, Dialogue for Health. Or you can Google National Overdose Prevention Network and get to the link that way. But these are all recorded. Today's session was also recorded, and the documents that we used were also posted on the site. So we'll make sure that if you have questions, please just go ahead and ask them now. Ask us later. We'll make sure that we can get you the answers that you need. We look forward to this partnership with you. We ask all of you to send us your questions and to send us your comments about this web forum and issues that you think that we should be holding in the future. This doesn't happen without you. And just as the final slide that we show is the thank you to all of you for being part of this group. And here's our website. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.